you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and hit that like button on the video. And finally, if you'd like to check out all 4 episodes that I've done with Matt, there's a playlist down below that has all of them right there when you're done with this one.
Columbus creates this massive slave trade of mining, subsequently goes back to Spain multiple times. You never hear about this. He doesn't go west. He doesn't even go past Cuba west. If you're saying that, then there's no documentation that he ever even tried to go west. He didn't even try, meaning the whole story is complete fabrication. The entire point was very similar to Cortez and Pizarro. Systematically conquered from north to south, an ancient region full of resources. But within the Aztec and the Maya, there's been estimates today by some researchers that we've lost 90+% of everything ancient in terms of writings and artifacts and describing their story. And to this day, the majority of those documents, you know where they are? They still exist.
Where?
The Vatican.
All right, Matt LaCroix, we're back for round 2. Had a good dinner last night, had a good talk about some things. So there was a lot we did not get to, of course, yesterday. I kind of expected that, to be honest. But one of the topics that you have explored a lot that I don't believe we've really discussed almost at all in any of the podcasts we've done is South America. And that is something I am extremely interested in because there's so much history there and I feel like it gets ignored a lot.
I would love to talk about it.
We're gonna. I had Luke Caverns in here recently, who is an expert on that continent in particularly, and he really blew my mind with some things.
In that community, there isn't an explanation as to what they would have been other than tombs. People just go, no, they definitely weren't tombs, and they definitely weren't built by the Egyptians. But look at all this evidence that points towards how old they are, but they don't really answer that question of like what their utility would have been. You look at the interior architecture of them and how strange the chambers are. It's very odd. And so one of the most common explanations is that they may have been like a water pump, that there could have been water pumping in and out of them to help cultivate agriculture. Here's a really interesting thing.
But I've also developed a really good friendship through doing this podcast with Paul Rosalie, whose biggest episode we ever did, and also like a real that's an exciting point of pride in this podcast because he's a guy who deserved to be on everything, and when he came on this show he really hadn't been on anything before.
Yeah, he took off, right? He took off after that.
And now he's been on everything and got on Lex Friedman, Joe Rogan, which is just a beautiful thing to see. Danny Jones down with the Danny Jones podcast also had a huge assist with that. I should also add I have a new episode with Paul Rosalie. In fact, 2 of them dropping right after this one. So if you're watching this episode more than the week after it came out, those are already out. Hit the link in the description below. But one of the things that he really pounded the table about when he was with me and then with Danny was about some of these researchers who, as he said, they think their life is the Da Vinci Code, who are getting a little careless with how they talk about the Amazon in relation to some things that are man-made.
Sure.
Now, I've had long discussions with him about this because I think there's a lot of more common ground than appears. But what have frustrated him with some guys like Graham Hancock in particular was that there would be these headlines that go around where it's like Graham Hancock says the Amazon was man-made.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair to Graham, that's not what he said.
No.
And
took it out of context, right?
To an extent. And so Paul understands that, but Paul also understands, as someone, for people who aren't familiar, he's lived in the Amazon jungle for the last 19 years.
Yeah.
He's fighting.
He's the Anaconda Man, right?
He's amazing. He's fighting all the crazy destruction that's been happening throughout the Amazon.
And bless him for doing that. I appreciate so much his journey in protecting the world's most important biosphere rainforest.
It is.
Thank you, Paul.
And we'll give him...
The Second American Civil War is going to make the Israel-Hamas conflict look like child's play. And according to my...
We'll give him as much of a platform as he wants moving forward, of course, because it's amazing work he's doing. But in doing that work, we all know how the headline world works now.
Right.
People don't even read the article, they read the headline.
And that's it.
It's a quick screen grab on Twitter. And it frustrates the out of him that people will read a headline that says, oh, according to Graham Hancock, things in the Amazon are man-made, so we could make it again. And he even pointed to a real-world example with, like, Bolsonaro down in Brazil, who's now no longer the president of Brazil, but was for a while, he would point to stuff like that, like, well, it's man-made, so don't worry, we can knock some stuff down. It's not an issue.
Yeah.
So what I've really wanted to see, and I would love to see it happen, is have Paul do a podcast, for example, with like a Graham Hancock or something, and we'll find all the common ground they definitely have to define what Graham means when he says man-made, because to defend Graham, as I've told Paul, he's not saying the whole Amazon's man-made. He's saying things like the Terra Preta and some of the plants are man-made, which does not mean that we can just keep destroying this biosphere. And
I'm happy to talk about that.
And taking away taking away an incredible gift to Earth. So I'll end this little diary of the mouth monologue with that and hand it off to you. But, you know, as long as we're on the same page with that, I always want to make sure we have that at the forefront when we talk about this topic.
I actually have a bachelor's in science, and I've studied biology and biomes and environments a lot in my life. I'm not just interested in ancient history. I actually am absolutely fascinated by the world, how the balance of nature plays with this cycle of how everything's perfect and how humans, you know, introduce themselves in environments and how the destruction of that. And then also the idea of like something like where we are right now, right? New York City. Well, how do some species even adapt to living, coexisting with humans in that environment? And that's another conversation. But directly to what you're saying about the Amazon, we have to be very careful to throw any statements out like that, because it is our most important biome on the planet in terms of a rainforest. You know, some could argue that the biomes like in the coral reefs are obviously incredibly important too. Right, they are. But in terms of a forest biome that takes in carbon dioxide and then releases oxygen for the world to breathe and all these aspects, the Amazon rainforest is truly a treasure of the earth. And Paul is 100% right in that. And I commend him for his efforts in protecting that, because it's not just about some trees getting cut down. It's about part of the heart of our earth getting cut down.
Yes.
And that's what he understands. And it's like it's kind of like if you imagine that the earth had a heart and it was breathing. The Amazon would be like that breath.
Yeah.
It is just the wealth of...
What's it, 20% of the Earth's oxygen emanates from
yeah.
there?
And but not only that, it actually cleans the water of our planet actually cleans itself through the Amazon. I'll give you an example. So much rain falls in the upper Amazon that it funnels down through the Amazon River, and you literally have one of the most biospheric proficient areas for wildlife and species are in the whole world right there, because the Amazon is so massive and drains such a huge area that it's just this absolutely captivatingly special place. And Graham brought up how there's some evidence of indigenous cultures that have lived there, right?
Sure.
I would just like to say before we go about what you just said, but I would like to just mention that I don't think those civilizations were very advanced. I think that's a good point to point out. Graham he says that they're...
How far back are we talking?
Well, that's the problem is, like, look at something like Machu Picchu. We'll jump right into South America.
Okay.
You'll get something like Machu Picchu. I was talking yesterday about how there's 3 distinctive building styles there, right? 3 distinctive building styles. It means that there's 3 cultures that have come and gone over time. I believe, based on the evidence that I've seen, is that third culture, the last one, the one that we think as being like the Peruvians that built, you know, the Inca. We'll call them the Inca as we see them. I believe that a lot of those individuals may have come from the Amazon. And let me tell you why.
And can we pull up a map of Machu Picchu, Alessi?
And the reason I say that is that when we look at the disasters and the evidence from Machu Picchu, you see that it was part of a civilization that built it, but then they look like they were almost entirely destroyed. There was potentially some survivors, and that's why we see that second level of building that's slightly less sophisticated, but with the same kind of style. And what it tells me is that imagine you had only a few survivors left from a catastrophe, and you met up with some indigenous groups, because I mean that area of Peru is you don't have to go that far before you hit the Amazon, right? It's like right there.
Yes.
So I imagine either the indigenous of the Amazon wandering up into that region and finding the ruins of those ancient civilizations, and then building on top of them and trying to learn what they can about them. That's why they're so primitive in comparison. Or even the possibility that some of the survivors could have sought them out to help rebuild their civilization. So I think that both of those probably plausibly could have happened in that situation. But what Graham is talking about with the Amazon, you could call it the Amazon basin civilizations, is that they do seem to be heavily focused on agriculture. And that's really what he was talking about. What Graham was referring to is he wasn't saying that the natural biome of the Amazon is artificial. He wasn't saying that at all. It's like those are some of the most ancient forests in the world. I mean, it's on the equator. It never was glaciated. It really hasn't been disturbed that much in comparison to a lot of the northern and southernmost hemisphere. You know, that area has ancient forests. Okay, you can't cut down a forest and then expect it to grow back like it did. You can't do that.
Right.
Because what happens is when you go into a forest and you log it, or you burn it, right? Usually they do that because they're clearing the land. In this case, for the Amazon, they're often clearing it for growing like soybeans or something.
Or cattle farms.
Yeah, or cattle farms or something. Those combination of those things. They're not really clearing it just to get timber or whatever. Like, it's actually they're trying to grow food and all these different things. The indigenous people were doing that too, but in a way where they were trying to live in harmony with the Amazon. So instead of cutting huge areas down and burning them, what they would do is they would clear plots. They would clear plots, and what Graham was talking about.
What do you mean by clear plots?
Well, like you would only clear what you really need. You wouldn't just like take everything out and
so
like,
it's not so indiscriminate.
No, it's like they were living in harmony with nature. Now, what Graham was talking about, and that not a lot of people may not know this, is that the Amazon, though, with all the proficiency of life and the different trees and all the different animals that live there, is actually very poor in terms of nutrients, soil, because they get so much rain that it literally just washes everything away, and the nutrients in the soil are actually very poor. That was what Graham was talking about. So what they were doing is the indigenous of the Amazon were putting a combination of different plants they were growing that they were actually planting.
Sure.
And they were creating soil. That's what they were doing. They were creating soil that they then could grow crops on.
And then they were able to, say, manufacture like banana nut trees, maybe.
Things like that. Right. Or something
like that.
maybe they brought over, because I think there was a connection maybe with Africa. With the Congo.
Is it Brazil nut or banana? I forget. Brazil nut trees.
Because I'll give you an example. Like, for instance, they do a lot of rubber work, rubber trees, and the ancients did in South America and up through Mexico. Yeah. But that originated in Africa, in the area of the Congo and the area of Mali and that area of Africa.
So how did it get there?
Well, that's the question, is like whether or not, and I do believe that there's a huge crossover between different cultures at different times that we just can't imagine could have made it. But I do think they did. I think we need to not underestimate it. Even groups that like aren't highly sophisticated lost civilizations like we're talking about. But if you have a group that is highly proficient at sailing, knows all those things, like why are we underestimating that they can make it to South America? You know, it's not. We need to stop underestimating the ancient people. They're not fragile and don't understand. Like they were tough and rugged. They knew how to take care of things back then.
Yeah,
they're
but
not like we are.
It is, and maybe they were more advanced with seafaring than we give them credit for. Because
that's what I'm saying.
It is obviously unbelievably treacherous to cross an ocean 100%. Like that. I mean, I think about even the Mayflower coming over here.
Yeah.
In that wood box and the conquistadors coming over in like a wood box like that. It's incredible that they pulled that off.
100%.
But how much can go wrong? Oh
and that's the thing. And obviously a lot of people have not made it, maybe over time. But getting back to what we said, the Amazon has poorly drained soils. It's actually kind of acidic. So that was why they were basically putting together growing plants and then combining different things together to create soils that were like a lot that had better pH and could grow more plants and different things like that. That's what he was talking about, I believe. I won't speak for Graham, but that's what was more of referring to. They weren't clear cutting the rainforest. They weren't doing that. That's not a thing. They were just taking plots and creating little communities, and they would clear what they needed to and raise crops, and then that was it. They weren't like seeking out to just conquer the whole Amazon, right? So let's just make sure that's established, because the current government and leadership of Brazil, they need to be cognizant of the importance of the Amazon and stop thinking about the power of just money and corruption and different things like that.
I think that guy Luna now is I don't know this for sure. Maybe people can correct me in the comments, but the new guy, I think he's a little better with that stuff.
I hope so. I'm not totally up to speed with current affairs in Brazil, so I won't say anything about that, but I just know the previous leadership was very bad. in terms
Yeah.
of clear cutting the rainforest and doing different aspects. So it's good that we're getting on the right page with that and we're moving
Yeah.
forward with that. But it's important to make that connection that there was indigenous people in the rainforest who I think because the rainforest has a much higher percent ability to survive a catastrophe down in the rainforest, deep down there versus being up on top of a giant mountain,
Sure.
12,000 foot plateau like Titicaca or, where Machu Picchu is. I think that they were wiped out. And I think that, but the indigenous people, because it's like we are today.
Grammarly now uses AI to help you write, not just revise. Type a prompt and generate a persuasive, mistake-free draft in seconds, personalized to your unique writing style. Download it for free at Grammarly.com.
If Julian Dory was thrown out into the northern Yukon and had to survive, would he make it?
No.
Could he trap animals for himself? Could he build a log cabin and have a whole self-sustaining thing?
No, there's stuff I would need to learn that I wouldn't be able to learn in
Well,
time.
I think that's a little bit like the lost civilizations.
Mm.
You get comfortable enough in what you live in, you stop being a hunter-gatherer survivor.
Yes.
You get comfortable in your environment, and right, exactly. You don't really do that stuff anymore, right? You have a whole civilization. Food's being grown in this consistent way where there's governing bodies and leadership. You have a whole community. It's a civilization. You would naturally not have all those inherent things anymore that you'd be practicing because you wouldn't need them.
You do, after dinner last night, when I was walking through New York, and I was thinking about, I guess it was after 10 o'clock or something like that. So many places are closed. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, you got to figure out just what it's like a battle to figure out where you're going to take a piss. Right?
Totally.
If you got to go real fast because you're like, well, are they open or are they not? This is how basic
Right.
the problems are
That's
now.
it.
Now think about if, as you said, if you're dropped in the middle of some Arctic tundra or something.
Right. So I think that's the mentality we need to get around. And I do think that the ancient lost civilization groups were more coherent than we are with nature and that kind of thing. But don't underestimate how significant these catastrophes were. Yeah. Okay. And how long they went on for, especially in this Younger Dryas 12,600 year period, just in that time frame. Right. And so that's why I think it is important to study the indigenous of the Amazon, because they may have been the true, this lost connection that came later with the Inca. Because so many of the originals were wiped out, and then what you had is, because if you study the Inca, you learn that there was a royal bloodline, royal kings, right? Atahualpa was the last Incan ruler before Pizarro, remember, he captured him for ransom, and he said, you have to fill an entire room full of gold. And so Atahualpa and his people that worked with him went to Cusco, which was this gold city, which I think was actually El Dorado. And we could talk about that too.
Put a pin in that. Yeah.
Right? And they get massive amounts of gold brought to him, but before they could get the entire amount of it, they brought half or something, right? And then they were going to bring more, but before they could bring all of it, Pizarro executed Atahualpa, killed him, killed the royal Incan leader who was considered the last of the royal bloodline of the Inca.
What a symbol.
Well, imagine you have a civilization that has ancient roots, and you have a royalty that rules it, right? We see that a lot of places in the world. Now imagine if that royalty is all that's left from another ancestral group, and that's why they rule and they think about the ways they are, right? And imagine that the indigenous groups are a mixture of people from Bolivia and the Amazon and different areas, and they're all just kind of part of that civilization. Well, if you kill the last bloodline leader of an entire civilization, and by the way, the Incan civilization was the most prepared and sophisticated of those American civilizations. They were even more sophisticated than the Aztec. They were. They had more developed cities, and they didn't have the corruption that the Aztec had. I didn't bring this up last time in our last show, and I got a lot of comments about it, and I want to address it.
Sure.
The Aztec were not great people at the end. They definitely became very corrupted with power. And a lot of the indigenous groups around it actually banded together with Cortez to destroy the Aztec because they didn't like the Aztec either.
Wait, I didn't know that.
Yes, I want to add that because I got some
How did
comments
that
last
happen?
time,
Yeah.
and I didn't fully explain it all, and I apologize about that. because there's a few details about Cortez that I didn't get quite right last time. And I just to bring that out, but
Please, go ahead.
so the Aztec civilization had its roots in a good place, but later on when Cortez came, they had become pretty corrupted and power hungry, and they were really, really irritating to the point where there were actual other groups that hated them.
Guys, if you're still watching this video and you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, please take 2 seconds and go hit it right now. Thank you.
They really did not like them. I think they were going to war at times. There was some killing going on. There was groups around the Aztec, let's say the periphery of them, that did not like them.
How long are these struggles happening relative to when Cortez came
hundreds
up?
of years.
Hundreds of years. So it's not just like the last 5 years.
Well, it makes it interesting that if that date that Cortez landed was even more based on not just the ancient prophecy, but on the idea that if they could have known that there was already that instability there, it was like a good time to come in. I don't know. That's a theory, because it's just weird that he comes in at this perfect time to have alliances with all these other groups and then take out the Aztec and then
men on horses.
And then they think that he's like the returning Quetzalcoatl and all that stuff. But let's pivot back for a minute to the Inca. The Inca were very different. The Inca hadn't gone down that road of becoming like a huge war empire. The Aztec had. And their warriors were called eagle warriors, by the way, in the Aztec. And they wore
bringing back the
eagle feathers, right?
Stuff, yeah.
Well, because but think about it, they became corrupted by war and empire and conquering.
Yeah, Matt broke all that down when he was here over last summer, so you can go check out that episode if you want to learn more there.
Right. So, but it means is that's an aspect that happens. We need to strongly realize, like, yes, they became corrupted. The Aztec became incredibly corrupted. At the end, before Cortez conquered them, they were sacrificing sometimes 100 people a day.
Ooh.
Ripping their hearts out while they were alive.
Wow,
they became very dark and corrupted. Very dark and corrupted. In fact, there was even there was a horrible instance. It's very it's hard to realize, but Cortez actually, one of his armies that he wasn't leading, but one of the groups that was under him, ended up, without his approval, went in and attacked the city, the central city of Tenochtitlan, right? We talked about that, right? But he went without Cortez, okay? And people can look up the details for this if they want to. But I found this, going back to, I actually wanted to go back to learn a little bit more because I made a couple of mistakes last time.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I want to correct that. And so this group of like 100 soldiers from Cortez goes into Tenochtitlan and they start stealing all these things and they get caught. The Aztec get them, the high warriors get them, and they hold them ransom. Ooh. And they tell Cortez that unless he returns all the gold and all these things, that they would kill them all, and they end up ripping all their hearts out alive.
Oh,
which is what made Cortez so angry, which is what led them to have such a bitter and horrible war at the end of, because the Tenochtitlan.
And how did that war go down?
It just was it was actually a very long time. It was many, many, many months. I think it was even like half a year.
Cortez versus Montezuma.
Just this things happening
Aztecs.
with different groups, battles, fighting. It doesn't happen right away. It's not like they go in one decisive battle. It's something where
that's how we think of it.
Right. I know that. So I wanted to say that about the Aztec, but they didn't have those roots originally. That's not where it started. Quetzalcoatl and Tenochtitlan and Teotihuacan weren't built by the Aztec. They had nothing to do with that. We need to make that firmly established. They came later and found the ruins. And we know that because they couldn't build anything that the previous culture did. It's the same thing. They built with more primitive work. It was like they found the ruins and then they built on top of it, and then they actually did create an empire. So it wasn't as primitive as some of the other groups they did. They made turn into an empire. But imagine that's not the way it is for the Inca. Let's travel back to South America for a minute. Imagine they are trading with the Inca, and there's a trading route that is one of the largest trading routes in the world at that time. And if not the largest, it was trading from the Incan Empire all the way up to the Aztec and even in the Maya. There was this ancient route where they were trading goods and services